The strobing light pattern cut through the Nevada dawn like Morse code written in lightning. 23,000 feet above the classified airspace surrounding Area 51, four F-22 Raptors maintained their intercept formation around a single aircraft that had appeared on their scopes without authorization, without explanation, and without any identifying transponder signal. The unknown aircraft, a weathered F-16 Fighting Falcon bearing no visible markings, continued its steady northeastern heading, as if the most advanced fighter jets in the world were nothing more than curious birds. "Ghost Rider 4, this is lead," crackled the voice of Colonel Marcus Kane through the encrypted radio channel. "Target is still non-responsive to all hails. Recommend we move to Phase 2 intercept procedures." Captain Elena Rodriguez, flying as Ghost Rider 2, adjusted her grip on the stick as she maintained position on the bogey's 7 o'clock. Through her helmet-mounted display, she could see the mysterious F-16's tail section clearly, too clearly. Something about the aircraft's profile nagged at her, like a half-remembered dream that dissolves the moment you try to grasp it. The jet's paint scheme was non-standard, faded to an almost ghostly gray that seemed to shift in the morning light. But it was the way the pilot was flying that caught her attention. Whoever was at the controls wasn't panicking, wasn't attempting evasive maneuvers, wasn't even acknowledging their presence. They were flying with the kind of calm precision that spoke of years, decades, of experience. "Two copies lead," Rodriguez replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. She'd been flying combat air patrol missions over restricted airspace for 3 years, and in that time she'd intercepted everything from lost Cessnas to foreign surveillance drones. But this felt different. This felt personal, though she couldn't explain why. The strobe light on the mystery aircraft's wingtip flashed again, 3 short pulses, followed by 2 long ones, then 3 short again. Rodriguez frowned behind her oxygen mask. The pattern was too deliberate to be random, too specific to be standard navigation lighting. It was almost like, "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her blood running cold as recognition dawned. Her father had taught her that pattern 20 years ago, sitting in their backyard in El Paso, pointing up at the stars and telling her stories about the old days, about signals that meant friend, when radio silence was life or death. Base 41. The emergency recognition signal that supposedly hadn't been used since the classified operations of the 1990s. The signal that meant the pilot flying that unmarked F-16 had clearance that went beyond anything showing up on their computer screens. Colonel Kane's voice cut through her sudden understanding. "All Ghost Riders, weapons hot. If this bogey doesn't respond in 30 seconds, we're cleared to engage." His tone carried the weight of standing orders, of protocols written in the blood of those who'd failed to protect America's most sensitive airspace. The Nevada Test and Training Range wasn't just any restricted zone. It was the heart of military secrets that foreign powers would kill to access. Rodriguez felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the strobe continue its methodical pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Over and over, like a desperate prayer, flashed in light. She keyed her radio, then hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if 20 years of her father's bedtime stories about classified operations had filled her head with romantic nonsense? What if the pilot in that F-16 really was a threat, and her hesitation got people killed? But as she watched the mysterious aircraft maintain its heading with unwavering confidence, something deep in her gut told her that shooting down this jet would be the biggest mistake of her career. The pilot wasn't running because they didn't need to run. They belonged here, in this sky, in this moment, carrying credentials that predated computer databases and digital authentication. The strobe flashed again. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Base 41, friend. Rodriguez made her choice. "Lead, this is 2, she called over the radio, her voice cutting through the static with sudden authority. "Hold fire. That strobe pattern, it's a Base 41 recognition signal." The radio channel fell silent for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. She could imagine Kane's expression behind his helmet, the way his jaw would tighten when confronted with information that didn't fit his neat, ordered world of protocols and procedures. Kane was a good pilot and a better leader, but he was also a by-the-book officer who'd risen through the ranks by following orders and trusting the chain of command above him. Say again, too. Kane's voice carried a note of disbelief. Base 41, that's not in any current recognition manual. Rodriguez felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the climate-controlled cockpit. She was about to bet her career on a signal her father had taught her while they watched airplanes trace contrails across the Texas sky. Negative lead. Base 41 is legacy authorization. Deep black clearance from the 1990s. If someone's flashing that pattern, they've got clearance that goes all the way to the top. Ghost Rider lead, this is Nevada Control. A new voice broke into their channel. The controller's tone was crisp, professional, but Rodriguez detected an undercurrent of tension. We show 4 Raptors in intercept formation with an unknown aircraft. What's your status? Kane keyed his mic. Nevada Control, we have an unidentified F-16 in restricted airspace, non-responsive to radio calls. We're 30 seconds from weapons free. Copy that, Ghost Rider lead. Unknown aircraft has no flight plan on file, no active transponder. You are cleared hot if the bogey doesn't respond. Rodriguez felt the world narrowing to a single point of decision. In 15 seconds, Kane would give the order to fire. In 20 seconds, AIM-120 missiles would streak across the desert sky. In 30 seconds, whatever secrets that unmarked F-16 carried would be scattered across the Nevada sand along with its pilot. She thought about her father again, about the stories he'd told her about pilots who'd flown missions that didn't officially exist, who'd served their country in ways that would never make it into the history books. Lead, she called, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Request permission to attempt visual identification before we engage. -2, maintain position. But Rodriguez was already moving, banking her F-22 into a shallow dive that would bring her alongside the mystery aircraft. She could hear Kane shouting over the radio, could feel the disapproval of her wingmen through the ether, but something deeper than military discipline was driving her now. Call it intuition, call it recklessness, call it the ghost of her father's voice whispering in her ear. She had to see the pilot's face before anyone started shooting. As her Raptor pulled alongside the F-16, Rodriguez found herself looking across 20 feet of empty air at a cockpit that should have been clearly visible through the aircraft's canopy. Instead, she saw only darkness, as if the interior were filled with shadow that light couldn't penetrate. The F-16's pilot was little more than a silhouette against what appeared to be an instrument panel that belonged in a museum. Then the figure turned toward her, and Rodriguez felt her breath catch in her throat. The pilot was a woman, that much she could tell even through the heavily tinted visor of what looked like a vintage flight helmet. But it was the way she moved, the casual confidence with which she acknowledged Rodriguez's presence with a simple nod, that sent chills down the captain's spine. This wasn't some lost weekend warrior or foreign operative. This was someone who belonged in that cockpit, who flew with the easy grace of someone born to the sky. The woman raised her left hand, and Rodriguez could see something glinting on her finger, a ring that caught the morning light like a tiny star. Then she pointed downward, toward the desert floor far below, and made a gesture that Rodriguez recognized from her flight training days. Follow me. Lead, this is 2, Rodriguez called over the radio, her voice barely above a whisper. I've got visual on the pilot. It's a woman and she's trying to communicate. 2, return to formation immediately. That's a direct order. Rodriguez looked at the mystery pilot one more time, saw her tap the side of her helmet where the radio would be, then shake her head. Radio problems or radio silence by choice. The strobe continued its pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Base 41, trust me. Against every regulation in the book, against every instinct that had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments, Rodriguez found herself nodding. She held up her hand, fingers spread, universal pilot sign for wait 5 minutes, then banked away from the F-16 and rejoined her formation. "Lead, request we escort the bogey to runway at Groom Lake," she said, using the official designation for Area 51's main airfield. "If she's got Base 41 clearance, they'll know about it on the ground." Kane's response was immediate and sharp. "2, you're out of line. We don't escort unknowns into classified airspace. We either identify them or we eliminate them." But even as he spoke, Rodriguez could hear doubt creeping into his voice. The strobe pattern had stopped, she realized. The mystery F-16 was now flying with standard navigation lights, as if the emergency signal had served its purpose. Whatever message the pilot had been trying to send had been received, decoded, and acknowledged. "Nevada Control," Kane called, his voice carefully neutral. "Requesting guidance on an unknown aircraft displaying what appears to be legacy recognition signals." The radio silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though Rodriguez's chronometer showed it lasting only 43 seconds. When Nevada Control finally responded, it was with a different voice, older, more authoritative, carrying the kind of weight that came from years of handling situations that officially never happened. "Ghost Rider Lead, this is Nevada Actual. Maintain escort formation with unknown aircraft. Do not engage unless the bogey becomes actively hostile. We're checking some old files." Rodriguez felt a surge of vindication mixed with apprehension. Nevada Actual was the call sign reserved for the installation commander, a full colonel who didn't usually involve himself in routine intercepts. If he was personally taking control of the situation, it meant her recognition of the Base 41 signal had opened doors that had been locked for decades. The formation continued its northeastern heading, 4 of the world's most advanced fighter jets escorting a single, unmarked F-16 toward one of the most classified locations on Earth. Rodriguez found herself studying the mystery aircraft with new eyes, looking for clues about its origin and purpose. The paint scheme, now that she examined it more closely, wasn't just faded. It was deliberately muted, designed to blend with the desert sky. The aircraft's configuration was subtly different from standard F-16s, with modifications that suggested specialized equipment. "2, Kane's voice came over a private channel, meant only for her ears. "You better be right about this." Rodriguez keyed her mic. "Copy that, Lead. I know how it looks." "No, I don't think you do." Kane's tone was grim. "When Nevada Actual gets personally involved, it means we're dealing with something that goes way above our pay grade. If you're wrong about that signal, if we're escorting a hostile into restricted airspace, it won't just be our careers on the line." She understood the implication. Area 51 wasn't just another military base. It was the nexus of America's most sensitive research and development programs. The aircraft and technologies housed there represented decades of advancement over anything the rest of the world possessed. Allowing an enemy agent access to that facility would constitute one of the greatest intelligence disasters in American history. But as Rodriguez watched the mystery pilot maintain perfect formation discipline, never varying from course or altitude by more than a few feet, she felt certain she'd made the right call. This wasn't the behavior of someone planning an attack or attempting infiltration. This was someone coming home. The F-16 strobe began flashing again, but this time in a different pattern. Long, short, long, short, long. Rodriguez frowned, trying to remember what her father had taught her about extended Base 41 protocols. Then it came to her, a memory of sitting in the garage while he worked on their old Pontiac, his voice mixing with the sound of tools and distant traffic. "When you see the secondary pattern," he'd said, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag, "it means the pilot is requesting priority landing clearance. It means whatever they're carrying can't wait." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. Priority clearance. The mystery pilot wasn't just identifying herself as friendly. She was declaring an emergency. But what kind of emergency required landing at Area 51 without going through proper channels? What could be so urgent that it justified risking interception by 4 fully armed F-22s? Nevada Control, this is Ghost Rider 2, she called over the open channel. Bogey is now displaying secondary base 41 signals. Recommend immediate priority vector to Groom Lake. This time, Nevada Control's response was immediate. All Ghost Riders, this is Nevada Actual. Alter course to heading 045, descend to flight level 150. You are cleared direct to Groom Lake for immediate landing. Rodriguez felt the formation bank as one, the 4 Raptors adjusting their course to bracket the F-16 in a protective formation. Below them, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, its ancient landscape marked by the geometric scars of decades of weapons testing. In the distance, she could make out the dark line of mountains that hid America's most secret facility from prying eyes. As they descended toward the restricted airspace that surrounded Area 51, Rodriguez found herself wondering about the woman flying alongside them. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what was so important that it had brought her out of whatever shadow world she'd been operating in, back to a facility that officially didn't exist? The answers, she realized, were waiting for them on the ground. But first, they had to land at a base that most of the world believed was just a conspiracy theory, escorting a pilot who carried credentials from operations that had never appeared in any official record. Rodriguez checked her fuel gauge and adjusted her altitude. Whatever was about to happen, she had the feeling that her life, and her understanding of what it meant to serve her country, was about to change forever. The runway at Groom Lake appeared ahead of them like a mirage, shimmering in the desert heat. But unlike a mirage, this one was real, and in a few minutes, the mystery of the base 41 signal would finally be solved. As the mystery F-16 began its approach, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to witness the end of a story that had begun decades ago, in a different war, with a different generation of pilots who'd sworn the same oath she had been asked to honor it in ways that would never make it into the official histories. The strobe lights continued their pattern as the aircraft descended toward the classified runway, carrying secrets that had been locked away for 25 years. And in her F-22, Captain Elena Rodriguez prepared to learn what those secrets were. The mystery F-16 touched down on Groom Lake's main runway with the kind of precision that spoke of thousands of hours in the cockpit. Rodriguez watched from her position in the overhead traffic pattern as the aircraft rolled out, its landing approach so smooth it seemed to float onto the tarmac like a leaf settling onto still water. There was no uncertainty in the pilot's technique, no hesitation or unfamiliarity with the field. She flew like someone who'd landed here many times before. Ghost Rider Flight, this is Tower, came the crisp voice of Groom Lake Approach Control. You are cleared to land runway 14 left. Security teams are standing by for the unknown aircraft. Rodriguez felt her stomach tighten as she began her own approach. Security teams usually meant armed personnel and serious questioning. Whatever clearance the mystery pilot claimed to have, it was about to be put to the ultimate test. She could see vehicles racing across the tarmac toward the F-16's parking position, black SUVs with tinted windows and military police units with their light bars flashing. But as she flared for landing, something caught her attention. The security convoy wasn't surrounding the F-16 in an aggressive posture. Instead, they'd formed what looked almost like an honor guard, maintaining respectful distance while clearly prepared for anything. It was the kind of formation reserved for VIP arrivals, not potential threats. Lead, you seeing this? Rodriguez called over the tactical frequency as her Raptor's wheels touched Nevada concrete. I see it too, and I don't like it. Kane's voice carried the frustration of a professional soldier confronted with a situation that defied his training and experience. Something about this whole thing stinks. Rodriguez taxied clear of the runway, and followed the ground controller's directions to the transient aircraft parking area. Through her canopy, she could see the mystery F-16 had shut down engines and was surrounded by a loose circle of security personnel who seemed more curious than threatening. The pilot hadn't yet emerged from the cockpit, but Rodriguez could see movement in the aircraft's interior, the subtle shift of shadows that indicated someone preparing to face whatever reception awaited them. Ghost Rider Flight, Ground Control, came the radio call as Rodriguez ran through her post-flight checklist. You are directed to remain with your aircraft until security debrief is complete. Do not, repeat, do not approach the unknown aircraft. Rodriguez acknowledged the instruction while continuing to watch the drama unfolding across the ramp. A staff car had arrived, its government plates and military flags identifying it as transportation for senior officers. From the passenger seat emerged a figure in the desert camouflage uniform of the Air Force, wearing the silver eagles of a full colonel on his collar. Even at a distance, Rodriguez could see the man's bearing, ramrod straight, radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of command responsibility. The colonel approached the F-16 with measured steps, his security detail maintaining a protective perimeter while giving him room to operate. He stopped beside the aircraft's cockpit and appeared to be speaking, though Rodriguez couldn't hear the conversation over the ambient noise of the busy ramp. After several minutes, the F-16's canopy began to rise with a hydraulic whine that carried clearly across the desert air. Rodriguez held her breath as the mystery pilot finally prepared to reveal herself to the world, or at least to the small portion of it that possessed clearance to know that Groom Lake existed. What emerged from the cockpit wasn't what Rodriguez had expected. The woman who climbed down from the F-16's ladder moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been flying for hours, but there was nothing of fatigue in her bearing. She removed her helmet to reveal silver-gray hair cut in a regulation style that somehow managed to look both military precise and effortlessly elegant. Even from a distance, Rodriguez could see that this was someone accustomed to command, to making decisions that affected the lives of others. The colonel stepped forward and offered what appeared to be a salute, which the woman returned with crisp professionalism. Then, to Rodriguez's amazement, the two officers embraced like old comrades meeting after years of separation. The formality of military protocol gave way to something more personal, more human, the reunion of two people who'd shared experiences that bound them together in ways that transcended rank and regulation. Jesus, Rodriguez whispered to herself, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a picture she wasn't sure she was ready to see. Her radio crackled with Kane's voice. "2, you still think we did the right thing not shooting her down?" Rodriguez watched as the woman pilot was escorted toward the staff car, her movements confident despite being surrounded by security personnel and thrust into what had to be an incredibly tense situation. There was something in her bearing that reminded Rodriguez of her own grandmother, a woman who'd served as a Navy nurse in Vietnam and had carried herself with the same unshakable dignity, the same quiet strength that came from having been tested by history and emerged unbroken. "Yeah, lead," Rodriguez replied. "I think if we'd fired on her, we'd have been court-martialed for killing a hero." Kane's response was interrupted by a new voice on their frequency. "Ghost Rider Flight, this is Colonel Harrison, base commander. Report to the main briefing facility immediately. Leave your aircraft secured and come armed with nothing but your curiosity." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. Colonel Harrison was a legend in Air Force circles, a pilot's pilot who'd flown everything from F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam to experimental aircraft that didn't appear in any official records. If he was personally involved in this situation, it meant they'd stumbled into something that went far beyond a simple airspace violation. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez found herself sitting in a sterile briefing room that could have existed on any military base in the world, except for the small details that marked it as something special. The chairs were more comfortable than standard government issue. The coffee was actually good, and the security measures to get into the building had been more thorough than anything she'd experienced outside of Pentagon briefings. Colonel Harrison entered the room with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to being the smartest person present, followed by the mystery pilot who triggered their morning intercept. Up close, the woman was even more impressive than she'd appeared on the ramp. She wore a flight suit that looked like it had been issued sometime in the 1990s, faded but impeccably maintained, with patches and insignia that Rodriguez didn't recognize but which clearly meant something to Colonel Harrison. "Gentlemen, Captain Rodriguez," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to briefing pilots on missions that didn't officially exist. "Allow me to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Ashworth, call sign Phoenix, retired, officially. Unofficially, she's been flying classified missions for the past 25 years that have kept this country safer than you'll ever know." Rodriguez felt the bottom drop out of her understanding of the world. Phoenix. She'd heard that call sign whispered in pilot-ready rooms, always in the context of legends and ghost stories. Phoenix was the pilot who'd supposedly flown reconnaissance missions over Iraq in 1991 that provided the intelligence for the opening strikes of Desert Storm. Phoenix was the pilot who'd allegedly infiltrated Iranian airspace in 2003 to photograph nuclear facilities. Phoenix was the pilot who officially didn't exist, whose missions were buried so deep in classified archives that even acknowledging them could result in treason charges. And Phoenix had just landed at Area 51 in a vintage F-16, flashing recognition signals that predated digital encryption, carrying whatever intelligence was so vital that it couldn't wait for proper channels. "Colonel Ashworth," Harrison continued, "has been operating under deep cover for the better part of 3 decades. Her missions have taken her places and shown her things that officially never happened. And 3 hours ago, she completed what may be the most important reconnaissance flight in American history." Rodriguez found her voice. "Sir, the Base 41 signals were authentic," Harrison confirmed. "Captain Rodriguez, your recognition of those signals prevented an international incident that would have had consequences far beyond anything you can imagine. Phoenix isn't just a pilot. She's a repository of intelligence that foreign powers would kill for, and which our own security protocols haven't been updated to recognize." Ashworth spoke for the first time, her voice carrying traces of a southern accent that had been smoothed by years of operational necessity. "The signals were my father's idea, actually. He flew P-51s in Korea and always said that technology would advance faster than bureaucracy. He was right. The credentials I carry don't exist in any computer database, but they're signed by people whose authority predates the digital age." Rodriguez stared at the woman who'd spent the morning dodging F-22s like they were training aircraft. "Ma'am, what did you see out there that was worth risking interception?" Ashworth and Harrison exchanged a look that spoke of shared knowledge and difficult decisions. Finally, Harrison nodded, and Ashworth turned back to face the 4 Raptor pilots who'd escorted her home. "3 days ago, I was conducting routine surveillance over the South China Sea when I witnessed something that isn't supposed to exist yet," Ashworth said quietly. "A Chinese hypersonic aircraft, flying at speeds that our intelligence community believes are still 5 years away from operational deployment. It wasn't a test flight. It was a reconnaissance mission, and it was photographing American naval positions with technology that makes our stealth capabilities obsolete." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rodriguez felt her understanding of the global balance of power shifting like sand beneath her feet. If China had achieved hypersonic reconnaissance capability ahead of American projections, it meant that every assumption about military readiness and strategic planning was suddenly obsolete. "The film I'm carrying," Ashworth continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing, "contains photographic proof of Chinese technological advancement that changes everything. It's intelligence that our satellites couldn't capture, that our monitoring stations couldn't detect, that could only be obtained by a pilot willing to fly close enough to see it with her own eyes. Rodriguez thought about the strobe signals, about the base 41 recognition pattern that had saved Ashworth's life and potentially changed the course of history. "Ma'am, why didn't you use normal communication channels? Why risk flying into restricted airspace without clearance?" Ashworth smiled grimly. "Because normal channels have been compromised. We've had indication for months that Chinese intelligence has penetrated our communication systems at levels we're still trying to understand. The only way to ensure this intelligence reached the right people was to deliver it personally, using protocols so old that our enemies don't know they exist." Harrison stepped forward. "Phoenix has been operating as a singleton asset for 25 years, conducting missions that require complete autonomy and absolute secrecy. She's one of fewer than a dozen pilots worldwide who possess the training, clearance, and psychological profile necessary for long-term deep cover operations." Rodriguez looked at Ashworth with new understanding. This wasn't just a pilot. This was someone who'd sacrificed a normal life, a normal career, even a normal identity in service to her country. The woman sitting across from her had spent decades living a lie so complete that even her military records reflected a fictional history, all to maintain the cover necessary for missions that officially never happened. "The question now," Harrison continued, "is what we do with the intelligence Phoenix has provided. The photographs she's carrying will require immediate analysis by our best technical intelligence specialists, but more importantly, they'll require a strategic response that takes into account Chinese capabilities we didn't know existed until this morning." Ashworth reached into her flight suit and withdrew a sealed package that looked like it belonged in a 1980s spy thriller. Physical film, protected by multiple layers of waterproof and tamper-evident packaging. In an age of digital photography and encrypted data transmission, she'd chosen the most analog method possible to ensure her intelligence couldn't be intercepted or corrupted. "This is what I was carrying," she said, placing the package on the briefing table. 12 rolls of specially sensitized film, shot with equipment that doesn't appear in any Air Force inventory manual. The images show not just the Chinese hypersonic aircraft, but also the base it launched from, the support infrastructure required for its operation, and the flight profiles that suggest operational capability far beyond what we believed possible. Rodriguez stared at the innocuous-looking package that had nearly gotten its carrier shot down by 4 F-22s. Inside that waterproof wrapping was intelligence that would reshape American defense strategy, that would trigger emergency briefings at the Pentagon, and probably the White House, that would launch 1,000 classified research programs aimed at maintaining American technological superiority. "Captain Rodriguez," Harrison said, turning to face her directly, "your recognition of the base 41 signals and your decision to recommend escort rather than engagement has probably saved American lives and definitely preserved intelligence that could prevent a war. However, what you've learned here today is classified at levels that exist above anything in your current clearance profile." Rodriguez felt her mouth go dry. She'd stumbled into a world of secrets that she'd never imagined existed, where pilots flew missions that didn't appear in any official record, and where decades-old recognition signals could mean the difference between an intelligence coup and an international disaster. "Sir," she said carefully, "what happens now?" Harrison smiled grimly. "Now, Captain, you and your flight are going to be debriefed by people who specialize in making sure that classified information stays classified. You're going to sign papers that make your current security clearance look like a library card. And then you're going to return to your regular duties with the understanding that this morning never happened." Ashworth leaned forward across the table. "Captain, there's something else you should know. The base 41 signals, your father didn't learn them from bedtime stories. He learned them because he flew missions like mine, back when the Cold War was still hot and American pilots were doing things that the history books will never record. Rodriguez felt the world tilt around her as pieces of her own history suddenly rearranged themselves into new patterns. Her father's stories about classified operations, his knowledge of recognition signals that supposedly hadn't been used since the 1990s, his occasional distant looks when aircraft passed overhead. Suddenly, everything made sense in a way that was both terrifying and proud. "Ma'am, are you saying my father was one of us?" Ashworth confirmed. "Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, call sign Viper. He flew penetration missions over Cuba in 1989 that helped us understand Soviet nuclear deployment patterns. He never talked about it because he couldn't talk about it, but the knowledge he passed to you today may have prevented a catastrophe." Rodriguez felt tears she couldn't control welling up in her eyes. Her father had died 3 years earlier, taking his secrets with him, or so she'd thought. But apparently, he'd passed the most important ones to his daughter in the form of stories about signals and procedures that she dismissed as the romantic imaginings of an old soldier. The Base 41 protocol, Harrison explained, was developed for pilots operating under such deep cover that traditional military identification could compromise their missions. It was a way for our people to identify themselves to friendly forces when normal channels weren't available or secure. Your father was one of the pilots who helped develop it. Ashworth stood up, her movement signaling that the briefing was coming to an end. "Captain, you did something today that required both technical knowledge and moral courage. You recognized a signal that saved my life and preserved intelligence that could prevent a war. But more than that, you honored the legacy of pilots like your father who served their country in ways that will never be acknowledged publicly." Rodriguez felt the weight of family history settling on her shoulders like an invisible flight jacket. Her father's stories hadn't been bedtime fantasies. They'd been operational lessons, passed from one generation of pilots to the next, ensuring that the knowledge necessary to protect classified operations would survive even when the operations themselves remained forever secret. "Sir," she said to Harrison, "what happens to Colonel Ashworth now? Where does someone go after 25 years of deep cover operations?" Harrison and Ashworth exchanged another of those looks that spoke of shared understanding and difficult choices. Finally, Ashworth smiled, the first genuine smile Rodriguez had seen from her since the morning's intercept. "Home, Captain. For the first time in 25 years, I get to go home. My cover identity dies today, and Victoria Ashworth gets to remember who she was before she became Phoenix. It's a gift not many people in my line of work ever receive." Rodriguez understood. Phoenix was being officially retired, her decades of service finally acknowledged by the people who'd sent her on missions that didn't exist to gather intelligence that officially was never collected. After a quarter-century of living someone else's life, she was being allowed to reclaim her own identity. But even as Rodriguez felt happy for the older woman, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ashworth's retirement marked the end of an era. The world was changing, becoming more connected and more monitored with each passing year. The kind of deep cover operations that Phoenix had conducted might no longer be possible in an age of satellite surveillance and digital tracking. The lone pilot operating under analog protocols might be going the way of the manual flight instruments and paper maps that had once been essential to aviation. "Colonel Ashworth," Rodriguez said as the briefing began to break up, "thank you for your service, for trusting us with those signals, for showing me what my father's stories really meant." Ashworth paused at the door and looked back. "Captain, your father would be proud of what you did today. But more than that, he'd be proud of the pilot you've become. The courage to make the right choice when protocol says otherwise. That's not something they can teach in flight school. That's something that comes from understanding that service to country sometimes means thinking beyond regulations and procedures." As the mystery pilot who'd spent the morning dodging F-22s walked out of the briefing room, Rodriguez realized that she'd been given more than just classified knowledge. She'd been shown a legacy of service that stretched back through generations of American military aviators, pilots who'd flown missions that would never appear in official histories, but which had shaped the world her generation now protected. The Base 41 signals had been more than recognition codes. They'd been a bridge between past and present, between father and daughter, between the classified operations of yesterday and the security challenges of today. And in recognizing those signals, Rodriguez had done more than save a life or preserve intelligence. She'd honored the memory of every pilot who'd ever flown into darkness carrying secrets that could never be shared, trusting that somewhere, somehow, someone would remember the signals that meant friend, when friendship couldn't be officially acknowledged. As Rodriguez prepared to leave the briefing room and return to her regular duties, she carried with her the weight of classified knowledge and family legacy, the understanding that her morning intercept had been part of a story much larger than she'd ever imagined. The story of American pilots who flew missions that didn't exist, protecting a country that could never officially thank them for their service. The story of Phoenix and Viper, and all the others whose call signs lived on only in whispered legends and emergency recognition signals that occasionally saved lives in the skies above classified airspace. 3 weeks after the intercept, Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in the ready room at Nelly's Air Force Base, staring at a letter that had arrived through official military channels but bore no return address or identifying marks beyond a simple Department of Defense stamp. Inside, written on paper so plain it could have come from any office supply store, was a message that made her hands shake as she read it. Captain Rodriguez, your actions on July 23rd prevented an incident that could have resulted in the loss of irreplaceable intelligence assets. While the details of that morning's events must remain classified, please know that your recognition of legacy protocols and your decision to act on that knowledge has been noted at the highest levels of government. Your father's training and your own judgment combined to serve the national interest in ways that cannot be publicly acknowledged but will never be forgotten. Should you ever receive unusual signals or encounter situations that seem to fall outside normal operational parameters, remember that service to country sometimes requires trusting instincts over instruments. Respectfully, a grateful nation. The letter was unsigned, but Rodriguez didn't need a signature to understand its significance. Someone, somewhere in the labyrinthine hierarchy of classified operations, had taken the time to ensure she knew that her actions had mattered. More importantly, they'd confirmed what Colonel